Alrighty then. Well, thank you all for being with us. A simple humility, a simple humility. Uh, Many different titles were kicking around in my head last night, and finally the idea settled in on a simple humility. And after it came to me, and after I sent out the email, I had to chuckle a little bit. True humility is simple in itself. Why do we have to call it simple? Isn't that making it more complicated than it needs to be? And that's what our minds do. That's what our intellect does. It takes things that are very, very simple and makes them complex. Remember the saying, are you smelling the roses or are you analyzing the fragrance? We take something so simple in experience of just being in the beautiful presence of the perfume of the rose. And immediately the intellect goes to work and tries to analyze, what kind of rose is this? This is a tea rose, or is this some other kind of rose? What does it smell like? Can we bottle it? Can we sell it as perfume? Can we make money off of this deal? And our monkey mind goes on and on and on, and it makes things more complicated than they need to be. But a simple humility, to me, the reason there's a distinction that I wanted to make, or I believe I wanted to make when I wrote it, and that is, we are kind of cautioned in Scripture, in the New Testament, in many different ways. We were told pride goes before a fall. We are told, there were festivals, there were times of the year where in that culture, people were supposed to fast, and what they would do is, in order to make themselves appear that they had been fasting a little bit more than they really had, they would take ashes from the fire pit and they would rub it on their cheeks. So they would make their skin look a little gray, and that was to create the appearance of humility, right? To make it look like they were really following the letter of the law more so than they were. In other cultures, there are periods where people fast for certain times of the day, and for whatever the period of the festival is. During certain times of the day, they won't eat, and what some people do is they just sleep. They just sleep through that part of the day, and that way they get up after the period of fasting is over, and then they can eat all they want. See. So to me, that, and there's another part in the New Testament where it says, don't pray in public, but pray in secret. Go into your prayer closet, go into the Father's presence within and pray. Don't do things for appearances. Don't stand out in the middle of the temple or on the street corner and make a big public show of your holiness. There's also something about, when you give your gift, don't drop it so it clangs. In those days, they used to collect the offering in like a metal vase kind of thing. And when people wanted to show off, they would hold their coins way up high, and they would drop them down. And of course, when they went into the vase, they would make a big clanging sound, so that everybody around would know that they were giving. We're told to give in secret. That it's not a show. There's something more important here, and don't make it into a show. And our ego likes to do that. Our ego likes to win. Right? So the intellect is always analyzing things and judging things and making opinions of things, and it created the ego, at least in my way of thinking. It created the ego, which is nothing more than a collection of opinions about who and what we are and the way things ought to be. But the intellect likes to be right, and the ego likes to win. So it's always kind of setting up these little contests and competitions to win. And I would imagine that somewhere along the line, somebody has come up with the idea of having a competition to see who would be the most humble. Just the irony of it, to win first prize in a humility contest. But that would make sense. See, that would make sense to the ego and the intellect. So what we're talking about today, the ideas we're talking about are going to revolve around this central theme of what is a simple humility. Why is it important, and how can we get there? And I'm going to lead right off by saying a simple humility is a necessary step in the evolution of our soul. And the reason that it is important falls into the things that we've been talking about for the last several weeks. The gifts have already been given. The presence of God is all around, and yet we don't see it. In the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas, which was one of the Gospels that was discovered in Egypt, I guess in the 40s, it's not part of the, like the King James Version of the Bible was discovered much later, and scholars are going to argue whether it should belong in there or not, but that's what the intellect will do, is argue. But there's a beautiful line in there. There's a beautiful saying or phrase or statement, whatever you want to call it. But it has one of the students asking Jesus and says, he says, Jesus, where is this kingdom? Now, I want you to remember that what Jesus taught was the kingdom. The Christianity of Jesus, or the theology of Jesus, if there is such a thing, is he talked about the kingdom. He talked about the kingdom, and the kingdom was within. And everything was geared to entering the kingdom. Seek ye first the kingdom, and everything else will be added unto you. And the kingdom, to me, is the presence of God, the awareness of the presence of God, which is much different than Christianity today, which is largely a teaching about Jesus. But the teaching of Jesus is about the kingdom. So the disciple says to Jesus, well, where is this kingdom? We keep talking about it, but where is it? And the answer is classic. It says, it's everywhere present. It's everywhere present. But men do not see it. It's here. It's now. And why don't we see it? Why don't we see what is already here? The simple humility that we're talking about is a step that takes us closer into that experience. If you go back to Old Testament times, if you go back to the story of Exodus, I'm looking at this as a teaching metaphor. I'm looking at this as a story for the evolution of the soul. Moses led the people out of Egypt. Egypt, tended to signify in biblical terms confusion, land of confusion, a time of chaos, bondage, slavery, all these experiences that we go through in our evolution. But here comes this this Moses character to lead the people out, and he leads them right up to the land of milk and honey. Excuse me. And milk and honey stood for prosperity and harmony. The people who were prosperous in those days, they had a lot of goats, they had a lot of milk. Honey is harmony because the bees go to many different flowers and they draw from the many different flowers and they blend it together. So honey is a symbol of harmony. Coat of many colors has the same significance, coming together, a harmony, a peace. Right? So here's this land of peace, this land of prosperity. The people had been kept in bondage and in slavery and in confusion, and they were crying out to God, take this away from us, save us from all this. And here comes Moses to fulfill their prayers, to take them away. And as they're moving away, they keep complaining, this is a lot harder than we thought. This is a longer walk than we thought. We would be better off going back and living as slaves than we would be continuing to wander in the desert. They wanted to go back to something that was certain, something that they knew, rather than to continue on to face something that they didn't know, even though the promise was that where they were going was the land of milk and honey, the land of peace and harmony. And they got right up to the edge. And they sent spies in to reconnoiter, to do some scouting, to get the lay of the land and who lived there and all these things. And several of them came back and said, "Ooh, you don't want to go there. You know, the people are huge and they're evil and they're mean and all these kind of things." And only one came back and said, "No, it's a beautiful place." But the people were scared and they didn't want to go. It was uncertain. They wanted certainty. They wanted security. And what we're told is they could not enter because of their unbelief. They had to continue to wander around in the desert, we're told, for another 40 years, right? Until the old generation died off, until the old ideas in consciousness died off, until all the fears and the doubts died off, until the need for certainty died off. And then they could enter. And this isn't just a story about a band of people who lived a long, long time ago in a faraway place. This is the evolution for each and every one of our souls. Each and every one of our souls. We all come right up to that edge. We all come right up to that place that we say that we've been wanting to go. You know, our whole lives we've been saying we want to go there. But we're not ready. We're not ready. Augustine said, "Oh God, make me good, but not yet." He wasn't ready yet. And that's okay. We all go through that phase. We all go through that phase. And what was it that kept the people out? It was their ideas, you see. It was their intellect. It was their ego. It was their fear. It was their doubts. It was their unbelief. Let's talk for a minute about involution and evolution and how consciousness unfolds. Joel Goldsmith has what I think is an excellent book called Consciousness Unfolding. And he has another one called A Parenthesis in Eternity. And he invites us to consider what we truly are as spiritual beings. Up until this point, we only know ourselves as humans. We may have little glimpses from time to time of the spiritual. We may talk about the spiritual. We may sing about the spiritual. But for the most part, we consider ourselves to be human beings. Occasionally, we think we're human beings having a spiritual experience. Once in a while, we get a glimpse of the fact that we are spiritual beings. But this is consciousness unfolding. Consciousness is awareness, and it is self-awareness. And if we consider what God is aware. I am. I am that I am. God is aware. That's it. That's it. Nothing else. Everything else after that kind of divides, kind of delineates. I am this, I am not that. You know, so if we say this is a table, we have inferred that it is not a chair, it is not a counter, it is not a car, it is not a tree, it is not anything else but a table. And yet if we just say it is in league with everything else that is. There's no delineation. And since God is everything, right, everything he has created, or it has created everything out of itself. God is, and everything is some part of it. So this is why the term I am, or the concept of I am, the I amness of the Old Testament, was the highest name for God. I am. And in Buddhism, we have the idea of the suchness, or the isness, you will hear referred to. It just is. It just is. Don't try to label it. Don't try to define it any further. It just is. And it is the same yesterday, today, and forever. It is being. And another book I would recommend to you is by Fenwick Holmes, and it's called Being and Becoming. It is about 90 pages long, and those are small pages too, and almost in a pamphlet form. It is about 90 pages long, but it is one of the most profound books that I have ever read on metaphysics, on spirituality, being and becoming. We have that which always is, which is the same yesterday, is the same today, same forever, but it is always becoming. And its becoming is the expression of its being. It is always unfolding. But yet as it unfolds, there's never more or less than there was to start with. There is just that which is expressing itself in different ways, in different situations. Our minds can't grasp that. Our intellect doesn't know what to do with that. Sounds like doublespeak. So we have this thing called life. And yet we have all of these different expressions, all of this different unfoldment of life. We have trees, we have plants, we have animals, we have fishes, we have birds, we have human beings. But they're all life. They're all part of life. We could even go back further and we could say that the minerals are an expression of life, a form of life. And we could go back and say the energy out of which all matter has come, is life. And whatever there was that may have preceded that was all life. We have life. So this thing called life is constantly becoming and expressing in different ways, in different shapes, in different forms, at different times. But it is still life. So what Goldsmith tells us then is there is consciousness, the I amness, the awareness. And it too is unfolding. It too is becoming. It too is expressing itself in ever increasing and ever different ways. And we might wonder, well, why are there so many different people? Why are there so many different ways of thinking and different ways of being? And if we step back far enough and take a breath, we can say that this is the consciousness of God experiencing itself in every possible way. Every possible way. That's why there's so many. That's why there's so many different thoughts, so many different ways of interpreting things, so many different ways of observing things and experiencing things. That one consciousness is unfolding. And the idea then of the parentheses in eternity is that this unfoldment is a continuum. Never had a beginning, will never have an end, but it just goes on forever. And somewhere in a spot in that continuum, there's a pair of parentheses, a pair of brackets. And that's you and I. You and I are a little snapshot, a little parentheses in eternity. But the bigger picture is that we are part of that consciousness that is unfolding. So involution and evolution. Involution is what gets things going. It's what kicked the can to get the Big Bang going, if you want to put it in terms of physicists. It is in the beginning God said, let there be. It is that involution. It is this intent, and this intent is an act of thought. God is spirit, God is thought. God thinks, God is aware, I am. And this I amness says, let it be. It's the author's way of telling us that the beginning of the creative process was the intention. And many of the creation myths in different cultures through the world identify creation as being an act of will and volition by a creator, whatever that culture recognizes as the creator. God says, let there be. That's involution. And then there's evolution. There is the unfoldment. Now, I know you read what's going on in the news and the arguments between creationists and evolution. And when I look at it, it boils down to this, to me, and it's just as my opinion. So there is this belief then that when God said, let it be, there was immediately and completely. Everything was created, boom. there it was in its final form. And then the evolution, and that would be the creationist view. And then the evolution view is that when God said, let it be, the unfoldment began. So the stars and planets came into being, but it might have taken, billions and billions of years for that to happen. And the earth separated from the waters. And that too may have taken eons to happen, but it was all an unfoldment that was started by the evolution, by the involution of the divine saying, let it be. If we look at an acorn, see here's the hard part for us to comprehend. If we look at an acorn, we see an acorn. Now, if we plant it in the ground and we take care of it and we watch it grow, it turns into a seedling, and it turns into a sapling, and then it turns into a young tree, and then it turns into a mighty oak. And we might look at that mighty oak and say, oh, now it's an oak tree. But it always was an oak tree, even when it was an acorn. It was an oak tree expressing itself as an acorn. It was never any less of an oak because it was an acorn. It was just an oak in the form of an acorn. It was an oak tree unfolding. It was an oak tree at that particular point in time in the appropriate form. And from the divine point of view, the creation is complete. It has spoken its word, and the creation is complete, even though the evolution and the becoming is unfolding. So if the divine says, let there be oak trees, and we have acorns, the divine says, yes, those are my oak trees. And when they hatch into seedlings, those are my oak trees. And when they hatch when they grow into saplings, those are my oak trees. And when they become the mighty oak, those are my oak trees. And when they give forth new acorns, those are my oak trees. And when the mighty oak finally falls to the ground and gives its body to fertilize the acorns, those are my oak trees. So you see, it's a continuum of unfoldment. It is consciousness unfolding. To put it perhaps in more relevant terms to us, let's say that you decide that you're going to go to Paris. You and your beloved, you decide that you're going to go to Paris. Involution. You made a decision, you're going to go to Paris. Now the evolution, the unfoldment starts to occur. You're going to go by plane, or you're going to go by boat. Pretty much the choices that you have if you're here in America. So you decide that you're going to take a cruise. You're going to go by boat. And you're going to take a cruise, and it's going to go across the ocean, and then you're going to get off that ship, and you're going to get onto a smaller cruise ship, a river cruise ship, and you're going to go all the way up the river, and you're going to moor right at the very base of the Eiffel Tower. This is the evolution. The ideas are starting to unfold. You buy your tickets, and you go and you get on the cruise ship, and you start across the ocean. And they've got the little TV monitors everywhere, and they have the GPS tracking system on it, and it shows you exactly where your ship is, how fast your ship is going, how many miles it is to your destination, how many miles you are from your port of departure. So you can watch every minute of every day. You can watch the unfoldment of this involution, the unfoldment of this intention to go to Paris. But what we lose sight of when we're watching that little blip move across the screen, what we lose sight of is that at that very instant, we are in the unfoldment. The trip to Paris is right then, right there. We tend to think, well, when I get to Paris, it'll be there. It is right here, right now, as I'm watching that blip on the screen. So let's say you're on the ship, and you have a spectacular night. The dinner is just superb. The wine is fantastic. The music that the band is playing is just takes you back to to special memories, to special places. The dancing is just wonderful. You're with the music. You go out on the deck and the stars are shining and the moonlight is glistening off the sea, and it is absolutely positively the most perfect evening that you had ever. And now you want to freeze that moment in time and save that memory. You're no longer with that blip in the unfoldment. You're trying to stay in the past. That moment has passed, but you are trying to be with it. You are trying to remember it. Can you imagine going back to the captain and saying, "Captain, turn the ship around. I want you to go back to exactly where we were at this time last night, because that was the most spectacular time in my life." And the captain would say, "No, I can't do that. We're unfolding. We're unfolding." So one thing that we do that keeps us from being in the moment, from being in life as it is right there in front of us, and yet we don't see it, is we let our mind linger on the past. We stay stuck in the past. The other thing that we do is we let our mind go forward, and we start to think, well, what are we going to do when we get to Paris? So you go down to the purser's desk, and they've got all these brochures of all the different tours that you can take when you get to Paris, and you're going through the brochures and you're trying to decide, and here's one for a walking tour, and you get a map of Paris and you lay it out and you say, well, if we get off the ship and we go 2 blocks this way and turn right, and then we go this way, we can see the most sights excuse me, in one day if we do that. Well, you're not on the ship, you see. You're not there in the process of unfoldment. You're off in the future. This is what the intellect does. See? Now, the intellect itself is an unfoldment. It is a step in our evolution. We had to develop the intellect, and we had to develop the ego and a sense of identity so that we could develop our uniqueness, but then we could learn that that's not all there is, that is not the truth of our being. In Buddhism, they tell us you had to develop an idea of who and what you are so that you could realize that is not who and what you are, so that you could let it go, so that you could move on, you could step into a simple humility. So we have come to the point in consciousness unfolding as us, we have come to the point in the evolution when God said, let there be beings like us. We are that unfoldment. We are that unfoldment. And the divine sees us as that. As it sees the oak tree and the acorn, it sees itself experiencing life as us, just as we are, just where we are. And now we have to realize that which got us this far, we have to let go of. We have to let go of. We have to enter into a simple humility. I was talking with someone last week at the TV studio, a gentleman who does some motivational speaking, and he was mentioning that it's very hard to get people to set goals, stretch goals for themselves. If you've been in corporate America, we always talk about setting stretch objectives. Those are the things. They had to be, you had to believe they were attainable, but they had to be at something you had to work hard to get to, stretch objectives. And of course, in the spiritual world, we say, as Robert Schuller would say, if your goals aren't so big that you don't need God's help to get there, then they're not big enough. And he said, well, he says, I can't get people to do that. I just can't get people to set their goals big enough. He says, and they don't realize that once they set their goals way beyond what they ever thought they could achieve, he says, then something else happens, something different happens. and the way to the means to the end becomes visible. And I said, sure. I said, and the reason for that is people want to set goals that they think they can achieve because they don't have to get creative to get there. It's secure, it's certain, see? It's something that they know. And they want to stay within that comfort zone. And yet the greatest growth occurs outside that comfort zone. This is why some of the greatest breakthroughs, some of the greatest innovations occur in a time of crisis, because the old rules don't work anymore. Remember when I was a kid, black and white TV, the Twilight Zone and those sorts of shows were on. And I can't remember the particular name of the show, but the premise was that they took these top scientists of the world and they went and they got them out of their homes in the middle of the night. There was like a half a dozen of them. And they told them that a nuclear war was about to start and they and their families were going to be preserved on this submarine because we needed their intellect in order to survive. And they put these scientists in the submarine, and the submarine submerged and was down underwater, and they gave these scientists some problems to solve that needed to be solved. I can't remember what the problems were. And they worked diligently and they started coming up with answers. And somehow as they were on the submarine, they got a reading from the surface, and they realized that there had been no atomic war, that the air up there was just fine. And they went to the captain of the submarine and they said, what's going on? You got us out of bed in the middle of the night. You put us on the submarine. You took us down here. You made us work tremendous hours solving these problems. And now we find out that there really was no war. And the answer, of course, the end of the show, the answer was, well, if you believe there was a crisis and you believe that the old ways no longer worked, it would force you to become more creative, more innovative, and find things that didn't exist before. So we like to stay in our comfort zone. We like to pretend that things are certain. We like to pretend that there is security. And we are afraid to go into the unknown. We are afraid to go into the land of milk and honey. We are afraid to go into that which we don't know. And sometimes, like the Israelites wandering in the desert, we'd rather go back to the slavery that we knew than to go forward into the freedom that we don't know. This is the mind's way of keeping us stuck. The mind does not want to be obliterated. It's afraid. So as we try to move forward, it will resist. It will give us things to think of in the past. It will give us things to ponder in a future that there's no guarantee that that future will ever be here. Yet we'll go right on planning it. And what we have to come to realize then is that it is humility. It is the simple humility, the practice of simple humility that allows us to begin to transcend. Meditation and humility. Developing the quality of humility. And let me kind of explain what I mean by that. We have this opinion of who we are. We have these ideas that somehow we can know everything that we need to know. That as Osho says, we're stuck in the delusion that we're the most important person in the world and the world just revolves around us. And because we have these ideas and we try to hold on to them so much, we cannot see what is already here in front of us. If you read the email I sent last night about the young monk and the old monk, and the young monk went to the monastery and said he wanted to study and he wanted to reach enlightenment. And the old monk says, well, tell me about yourself. And the young monk started to tell him about himself and kept telling and kept telling and kept telling. And the old monk said, would you like some tea? And the young monk held out his cup. And the old man poured the tea into the cup. And when the cup was full, he kept pouring. And the hot tea spilled over and burned the young man's fingers. And he put the cup down. He says, why did you do that? And the old monk said, well, he says, you see, the cup was full. And because it was full, it couldn't take any more tea. So the rest of the tea just ran over the edge. And the young monk said, so? And the old monk said, well, he says, you're so full of yourself that there's no room for you to take in anything new. You have to go empty yourself out. You have to let go of these ideas that you have, that you know the way things are, the way things work. He had to practice simple humility. Simple humility. So the simple humility that I am talking about is the actual acceptance and the actual practice of the idea that of our own selves we do nothing. That we literally know nothing. Everything that we think we know is probably wrong. If you've lived on this earth for a while, you can look back at all the things that you were taught in school and then watch your grandchildren come home from school and have them tell you, no, that's not the way it is. I remember studying electronics and learning about protons and neutrons and electrons and how the electrons gathered in bands, and they called shells, and there were so many in the first shell and so many in the second, and on and on and on. And it had this great theory about how the electrons would move through a piece of copper wire, and that's how electricity flowed. And I understood it so well that I could go to was Radio Shack in those days, and I could buy a handful of electronic components, and I could go home and get my soldering iron, and I could build a circuit, a little amplifier, some type of a circuit to do something. I understood the theory. I understood how those electrons moved through the copper wire and how they went through vacuum tubes and then later transistors and then later integrated circuits. I understood that. And I understood it well enough to build things, and I understood it well enough to repair things. And now I understand that those things don't work the way we thought they did. Even though we learned that there were a certain number of electrons in each shell, well, they may be there, they may not be there. They're there if you're looking for them, but they may not be there if you're not looking for them. And there's this great uncertainty, this great uncertainty. And of course this drives people crazy, you know. We want to be certain. We want a world that is certain. So one of the first things we have to do in our simple humility is we have to give up the need to know. We have to give up the need to be certain. Don't waste our time trying to figure out things that really don't matter anyway. See, people do this a lot. I've got to know why. I got to know why this happened in my life. I got to know why this came up. No, you don't have to know why. You'll probably never know why. Ernest Holmes says we'll probably never know why, so there's no sense in trying to dig it out. What we need to do is we need to transcend the consciousness that existed at the time that it happened. Let's get about that business. We need to give up the idea that there's certainty in this world. There is none. There is no certainty in this world. We all act as if there's just an unlimited amount of tomorrows, and we don't know that. We don't know that at all. The idea of certainty is an illusion that keeps us from also transcending the consciousness that keeps us stuck, the consciousness that wants to go back to that wonderful night on the ship when we had such a great evening, the consciousness that wants to go forward to what we're going to do when we get to Paris. We have to transcend that consciousness so we can be in the consciousness that is already here, the kingdom that is already here, the kingdom. So we can do two things. The first is when we find ourselves getting caught up in our mind, is to just stop and breathe, take a deep breath, and recognize that you are the witness to these events. And that detaches you from them a little bit. I am the witness. I am the witness. But I am here now. If we can learn to be here right now, mindfulness, right? mindfulness meditation. Be here now, right now, just be here now. Then we can start to experience things as they are instead of as we expect them to be, as we want them to be. Blessed are the poor in spirit. These are the people who have given up their preconceived notions about the way it ought to be. In Buddhism, there's a saying where the Buddha told his disciples, if you see me coming down the road, kill me. If you see the Buddha coming down the road, kill him. It's not the Buddha. It's your concept of the Buddha. We have these preconceived notions about what God is and how God ought to work and what God ought to do and how certain my life is going to be in the future. And we need to give up all of those. We need to be willing to step fearlessly into the unknown with complete confidence and complete trust that the divine love that has taken us this far is unfolding its own consciousness as us and will take us where we need to go next. So the humility is in the prayer of I of my own self do nothing. The humility is coming to realize that there is an intelligence that is so much greater than we are capable of understanding. And that intelligence is taking care of business. It is beating our heart, it is moving our lungs, it is digesting our food, it is creating new cells. That intelligence exists as pure consciousness. And when we let go of the ego, the intellect, the need to be right, the need to be certain, when we step into the humility, we can live moment by moment and say, okay, God, what now? Okay, God, what now? Okay, God, what now? There was a movie that was made in the 50s when I was a kid growing up called Quo Vadis, and it's a line from Scripture, and it's Latin, and it means whither now, my Lord. And in the movie they had the main character was Saint Peter, and Saint Peter didn't know what to do, didn't know where to go, was kind of trying to figure things out, and he stops on the road to Rome, and he says, Quo Vadis Domine, whither now, my Lord, where are you taking me now? And of course that road, the road took him to Rome, where he was crucified according to the story. He followed his divine direction, even though it led to his mortal end. So we don't have to get caught up in anything quite as dramatic as the screenplay writer made it. But I do believe we have to come to rely not on our wits, not on our strength, not on our own abilities, but we have to be willing to take life to the next level, or let life take us to the next level, where we move beyond the old ways of doing things, the things that we're comfortable with, the things that we're certain with, the things that we know how to do, and we have to be willing to step out and say, okay, God, I don't know, but you know. But the divine in me knows, and the divine as me knows, but my ego and my intellect don't know. Don't have a clue. But you lead me. You guide me. You direct me every step of the way. You provide all that is required. You bring the perfect helpmates into my life. And I of my own self do nothing. But it is the Spirit within me that does it all. So I invite you as you go through this day, and I invite you as you go through this week, to do two things. As you start to catch your mind going back in the past, going off to the future, as you catch your ego starting to say, well, I know how to do this and I know how to do that, breathe. Take a deep breath and say, the witness within me observes this, but there's a higher truth here. God knows another way. God knows a better way. God knows a different way. And as Emerson said, I get my bloated nothingness out of the way. I get my ideas, my limiting expectations, I get them out of the way. And I let God be its magnificent self as me. As consciousness unfolds, you can see that the minerals became the plants, and the plants became the fishes, and the fishes became the animals, or something along that line. But there's this unfolding. And eventually, that consciousness took the form of human consciousness, the ego and the intellect. But there comes a time where that has to go too, that has to give way to the next level, which is the divine awareness, the divine consciousness. We must enter the kingdom, the awareness of the presence of God here and now. And we must trust it. We must trust it. That which brought us here as its representative, as its instrument, as its own expression of life, has not abandoned us, will not abandon us, could not abandon us. And it is ready, willing, and able to show us the next step if we can get our ego and our intellect and our need to know and our need to be right and our need to be certain out of the way. Say, God, my intellect doesn't know. Show me the way. Show me the way. And that is how the next step of our great adventure begins. And so it is.